and we can get the show on the road. All right. Good evening, everyone. Chris Swan, and with us is also the director of the Santa Rosa Island Research Station, Russell Bradley, and the co-president, Mia Humphreys. Tonight we have our guest speaker, Dr. Allison Alvarado from the biology department here at CI. She teaches ecology, ornithology, among a couple of other choice classes, and today she's going to be talking to us about some island time and sort of her experience working in and around Channel Islands. So with further ado, the floor is yours, Dr. A.
All right, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Russ and Mia, for inviting me. So I've named this talk Island Time, and hopefully you'll see why later on, but the subtitle is Circuitous Routes to Real Jobs. I have a lot of things in quotes in this talk on and around the Channel Islands. And so you'll see why I say real jobs in a little bit. All right, so you might be thinking, oh no, not another talk about birds. I think this is the now third week in a row that you guys have had a speaker who's focused on birds. So when I realized that, I decided not only to talk just about birds, but I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll frame it a little differently, and I'll talk about, I'll just kind of tell stories, right, about my journey to this job here at CSUCI. And so it's kind of split into three parts that's kind of chronological. Now, the reason that I think it's relevant, hopefully, to students is because I'm going to try to interweave advice about getting experience and landing a job in your field. Okay, so so it is really geared towards students. So hopefully, if you're not a student, you won't find it too. I don't know, just like too much storytelling, okay? But anyway, so I'm going to start with college, like when I first started college. Okay, so when I say initiation, I'm talking about college and internships, because that's what actually landed me my first job on the Channel Islands. Okay, so believe it or not, even though it's so slow going and feels like you're slogging through your classes and everything without a guaranteed job at the end, believe me that you're moving closer to doing what you want to do ultimately for a career. So you are making the right choice by getting your degree, okay? So I actually grew up in Southern California, and I couldn't stand it. I was like, 75-degree weather, warm, sunny skies. I'm like, no, thank you. Didn't know yet what it was like elsewhere. And I actually went to college in Oregon, and it was a very small liberal arts college. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because in certain ways, it's very similar, I think, to CI. And the main thing is that we had the opportunity there to really get to know our professors. Okay, so just like at CI, because it's smaller, our classes are smaller, your professors are really, really accessible. So that's something you definitely want to take advantage of. Why? One of the reasons is because they'll be your recommenders eventually. And also, you'll notice that networking is going to come up several times in this talk. And your professors are, sort of will be part of your network who are going to know about job opportunities. So a little bit more about my undergraduate experience. I was really fortunate and got to do a lot of research as an undergrad. So I actually studied abroad and did in Costa Rica, and did actually a hummingbird project. I was following these green hermits around the cloud forest in Monteverde. And it was just an amazing experience. Okay, I've learned a lot, networked a lot. This is going to come back up later in the talk. Okay, so it was doing this experience and getting those recommendations from my professors on this study abroad that got me my next undergraduate research opportunity, which was an REU in Gothic, Colorado. So at Rumble, Rocky Mountain Biolab. And I didn't study hummingbirds, although lots of people were studying hummingbirds there. I studied plants, Delphinium nelsonii, this larkspur. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, again, my mentor for that project served as a recommender for me for years after that, like into grad school. And also, an interesting tidbit is this is where I met Dr. Alarcone. We were both undergrads as REUs at Rumble. So you can start seeing how even as an undergrad, you're building a network, and currently your peers are going to be potentially your colleagues in the future. And then finally, my last undergrad research experience was with Bombina orientalis. It was actually a senior thesis with a professor who wasn't necessarily doing what I wanted to do. I really liked being outdoors and, immersing myself like in ecology. And this particular project was on developmental plasticity in frogs, which the reason I'm really bringing it up is because I want you guys to realize that whatever experiencing you're getting as an undergrad is, you're not going to be stuck, right? Just doing that. You're really trying to broaden your horizons, try out different things, whether it's in the research context or classes, to really kind of figure out like, ooh, what really does excite me the most. And honestly, once you get involved in research, you end up, just getting sucked into the project, right? So this turned out to be an amazing project. And again, that sort of small world thing, my undergraduate thesis advisor ended up knowing my graduate advisor. They had been postdocs together, right? So it's just these things like keep coming up. And so then once I graduated after doing this undergraduate research project, I'm like, okay, get a job. Well, it turns out I wasn't really able to get the jobs that I wanted, which is what I hear from a lot of our undergrads, right? It's like they're about to graduate and they're looking for jobs and they're like, oh my gosh. So what I ended up doing was I did a bunch of internships. Now, many of our students feel like they can't do internships because of financial constraints. They have to work in order to support themselves. I did too. What I ended up doing was this crazy thing where I would come back home and live at my parents' house and work a temp job, like in an office, which was, not what I wanted to be doing. But it's what allowed me to like basically travel and get all this internship experience. Okay, so my first one was the Palila project on Mauna Kea, so on the Big Island of Hawaii. And this is an endangered honey creeper, big project. And, but this is where I really first started handling birds. Like I hadn't had the opportunity to miss net birds. So I got training to do that. I got a lot of training on this internship. Okay, so this really opened a lot of doors for me. It was through USGS. A lot of government internships involve endangered species, right? Because they tend to be big projects that are well funded. And so yes, this was a USGS project. So this opened a lot of doors for me because I did go back home and do my temp job before I landed my next internship on a fairy wren project. So this was in Australia with the red-backed fairy wren. Okay, so Molaris Melanocephalus. These are super cool little birds. And the experience I got on this project was more handling of birds, like we were misnetting, we were banding birds, it was a color banded population. We also did a lot of nest searching. Okay, so here's a fairy wren going into a little nest. And this was actually a project for somebody who was, I was a field assistant for somebody who was doing their PhD on this project. Okay, but then this landed me my next job, internship in Fairbanks, Alaska, working for the Alaska Bird Observatory. Okay, and what this particular study was doing, we were nest searching, basically trying to see like what avian productivity was on an Air Force base. So Allison Air Force Base, to kind of look at the effects of overhead flights on, breeding birds. So those were like 3 internships that I did after I graduated, okay, in order to get enough experience then to get a real job, which I'll talk about in the next section. But just to kind of recap a little bit, like most of you guys are undergrads, right? So just some sort of take-home messages from what I was talking about was it's really important to build relationships with your professors, okay, which you have the opportunity to do at CI. You're also wanting to focus on skills and activities to add to your resume or CV. So like that senior thesis, it really helped me with my writing, my scientific writing, and just writing in general. Writing is very, very important. Most undergrads in STEM don't realize that. It's a great opportunity to be learning software like statistical programs, GIS. If you have the opportunity, to do internships, then that's great. Other ways to get experience is through undergrad research, right? That's another way to get to know your professors. All right. And so as you guys are graduating, right, you have these options. And most people think like, because whatever pressure for their parents, from their parents, student loans, whatever, it's like, I need to get a real job. And the advantages of getting a real job are really that you're making money. But however, it's really not that likely that you're gonna land like this great real job right out of college that's in your field, unless you've already had a lot of internships, right? So if you haven't, then you might need to go the internship route. Now the disadvantage to that, right, is you're not making a lot of money. They usually give a small stipend for like living expenses, but it usually is in your field. So you're getting that critical experience. So like for me, it was getting that bird handling experience, doing the misnetting, doing the nest searching, and also, traveling around was fantastic as well. But what I recommend for people who really don't see this as an option and they just have to get a real job that's not in their field necessarily, is it's important to find time to do this then outside of your work, either interning or volunteering, to get that experience. Okay, and then obviously the other option is going to grad school. I'll talk a little bit more about grad school later, not a lot, but what are the pros? That if you go to grad school, you can definitely expect to get a job in your field, I would say. But it just might take a while. And you're not making a lot of money as a grad student. However, going to grad school will ultimately lead to more money down the road. So if you are, concerned about your income, then even though you would have to sacrifice longer to get there, this might be a good option for you, all right? Okay. So now I'm going to move to the next part and talk about how I finally got that real job. And so this was listed as a permanent full-time position as a wildlife biologist. When you're in your early to mid 20s, like that was a really big deal for me. Um, um, I know that Maddie, when she was talking about having worked on some of the islands, and then she ended up, her most current job is on San Clemente Island, working on this project. I noticed she said that it was a seasonal position. So that's what a lot of undergrads encounter, is that kind of seasonal position where you're, where as soon as you get to your job, you're having to start looking for your next job. Okay, so that's why this full-time permanent like was a really big deal. And it happened to be on San Clemente Island, which before this time I'd only been to Catalina, right? Like Avalon. So I was just going into this blind, having never been to the Channel Islands other than Catalina, and also like committing to moving back to Southern California. Because remember, I couldn't wait to leave. And then I'd only come back to like temporarily, you know, save money. And so this was like committing to come back. And so the reason I took you through all those previous slides was really to emphasize what it took to finally get this real job after undergrad. So I just want to say, so don't be discouraged if you don't land something like right away. Okay. All right, so this job is with a bird called, well, San Clemente loggerhead shrike. It's a butcher bird. So it's a passerine that is interesting because it's kind of predatory. So it has this like hooked bill, and it's called the butcher bird because it caches its prey. So this is showing a mouse that's been cached. I covered up this because this is actually a San Clemente Island shrike, but I couldn't find a cache from an island bird. So I kind of overlaid these two, but they eat various things like lizards, mice, larger insects, that kind of stuff. Okay, so this was the project. Again, it was endangered. So it was federally listed. So kind of like the Palila project in Hawaii, it was a big project. Okay, really well funded, lots of people working on it. So I was part of the research crew. And what that meant was that we were studying kind of like the habitat and diet and behavior of the shrike. So what would we do? We would do Malaise trapping, which is trapping insects, and then going back to the lab and slogging through the identification. And then we would do Sherman trapping. So we would trap the Paramiscus is sort of the native rodent out there, but there's also some non-natives, mainly the mus out there. And then we would do surveys for lizards, mainly the Uta, Stansberryana, the side blotch lizard, but also, you know, we would be looking for like the night lizard, the island night lizard, which is an endemic out there. And we'd also do raptor surveys. I didn't put a picture on, but we'd look for like kestrels and corvids, you know, like ravens and stuff that could be pestering or harassing the shrikes. And I put this picture in here because on San Clemente, you know, when I was actually flying in, I was actually coming from Alaska, and I couldn't believe, I'm like, what did I get myself into? Because it just looked like this brown rock. I'm like, oh no, I shouldn't have come back. But it turned out to be great. Like the thing about San Clemente is, I'll talk about this more later, but it's a military base. So the facilities out there, some of them are very nice. There's sort of a lot of buildings in this area. This is Wilson's Cove. It's all kind of near the airstrip on the northern end of the island. And so we all lived there. kind of separated from the Navy folks. So we sort of had our own, it was the NRO, the Natural Resources Division. Okay. And so a little bit more about the shrikes. So I think they were listed in 97. And so you can see that their numbers were pretty low. I think that the lowest they got to like 12 or, just around a dozen birds. And then they were listed, and then all of the, projects started, and they started captive rearing and supplementing the birds. And then also sort of protecting the wild-born birds. And so it was, like I said, a project with a lot of crews. I was on the research crew, but there was, sort of like the bird monitoring crew. One of those was run by PRBO, Point Reyes Bird Observatory, now called Point Blue. They were sort of in charge of kind of monitoring the population of shrikes. So banding them, taking measurements, monitoring the nests, that type of stuff. And then most of the other crews that I worked with were all part of IWS, which was the organization that I worked for. It's a NGO that does a lot of work on the islands. And so they were actually they were in charge of the release crew that would release the captively reared birds, and they do things like supplemental feed and stuff like that to sort of ensure reproductive success. And there were a lot of other groups out there. This was one of the coolest spots. This was the zoo, the San Diego Zoo was sort of in charge of the breeding of the shrikes that were to be released by Institute for Wildlife Studies. And so this was sort of their facility, which was awesome. You can kind of see how on clear days, this was, there's a nice marine layer on this day, but on clear days, you could see the ocean and it was gorgeous. But other parts of the Shrike Project, an important one, this was the case with the Palila Project as well, was predator control and management. Okay, so the island fox at the time wasn't listed yet, so they were actually kind of considered a predator, as were feral cats. So IWS, worked with the fox, and that was actually where I met my husband. He was on the Fox Project, and but like I said, there were a lot of there was a lot of research going on out there on San Clemente. So I don't really know that much about the archaeology, but there were archaeologists who would work out there. And this is just a picture, a historic picture from Ilopedia about showing that there were these camps out there where they did kind of abalone drying and curing, that kind of thing. So there were anthropologists out there. There were lots of botanists out there, lots of scientists. So it was really great. And I know you guys have probably mostly been talking about the Northern Channel Islands. So that's why I thought, okay, well, I'll focus on Clemente. And I don't think Maddie talked about it very much. So I just have a few more slides talking about how SCI, meaning San Clemente Island. Most of you guys probably think of SCI as Santa Cruz Island, but since this was my first introduction to SCI, that'll always forever be San Clemente for me. And so how's it different from the other Channel Islands? Well, first, it's really long and narrow. So it has a different shape, which we know, and and a different size, the shape and size. So it's 21 miles long and 4 miles wide. And since it's a military base, there's no public access. So like I said, it was just kind of us out there with the military, and it's their island. So we had to, kind of abide by all their rules. But you know, just like some of the other Channel Islands, it does have some endemics. Obviously, the shrike and the fox and the deer mouse and the night lizard and a lot of plants. Okay. Now the airstrip on San Clemente was really nice compared to the one on like Santa Rosa, which I've never landed on, but walked by it so many times. So, but the main difference, right, is that it's a military base. So you would see all these like weird operations happening like during your sort of daily life, right? You're like kind of going down the main road, down the island in your truck to go and, you know, park so you could hike down this canyon. And there's just weird stuff going on with like, you know, planes flying around. This one is of like these helicopters. So, and there'd always be like boxes or buildings that would be appearing somewhere. My husband worked a lot at night, and so he would see weird operations at night as well. It was just very, very interesting. Another thing is that, so San Clemente Island has this area called Shoba, which is like sort of this shore bombardment area. And so there's a lot of unexploded ordnance in Shoba. And as the biologists, we had to have access to Shoba because that's where a bunch of the birds were. We didn't release in Shoba, we weren't allowed, but the birds would find, you know, this part of the island. It was on the far south side of the island, and nest there. So we had to monitor them there, right? So we would get access to Shoba, and it would be very, very strange because we'd have to time everything. We'd have to like be out by a certain time, and not that they were going to like bomb us when we were in there, because, right, I'm sure they know we're there, right? But you'd kind of freak yourself out because like you have 15 more minutes to get out, and there'd be like planes flying overhead, and you're like, oh no. Also, we would have to like walk around unexploded ordnance. It was really weird. You had to get training before you went out, and then you would try to like really steer clear of like all of this old stuff. So yeah, the whole island, the whole military base thing was very interesting. But also the kind of like geography and topography on the island was really cool. It turns out that on the western slope, it's very terraced. So we see that on a little bit, like on Santa Rosa a little bit, and you can see kind of like these steps. And there were roads that went down here, but for the most part, the shrikes were in the canyons. So you'd park really like up the top of the canyon, and then you'd hike all the way to the canyon, usually to the coast, and then you'd have to hike all the way back to your truck. And so I noticed this on Santa Rosa too, that a lot of times you have this like perspective that's really interesting on the islands, where you can kind of see where you're going and then turn around and see how far you've gone. And it was always kind of mind-blowing to me, like, wow, I just walked that far, or like, oh, I have to walk that far. So yeah, so that's the west side. It's very gradual. But then the east side is really dramatic, has these like really steep escarpments. And sometimes you have to walk down them, like especially for the shrike surveys that happen several times a year. You have to walk all the way down, where you're like holding on for dear life, you know, hoping you don't like fall and die. So this is just a photographer who takes amazing pictures, and he actually does a lot of diving. I didn't put any of his sort of kelp forest photos in, but they're really amazing, because you can imagine. So San Clemente is 41 miles offshore. So whereas just for comparison, Rosa is 26 and Anacapa is like 11 or 12. So it's much farther offshore. So the fishing is very different. It's also, down south. So the water's warmer. So again, the fishing's different. The kelp forests and the fish that are in those are probably a little different. So really, really, really cool area. There are a couple other Southern Channel Islands. I mean, I imagine you've heard a lot about Catalina. We had a lot of coworkers who also worked for IWS on Catalina. And so we would go visit them sometimes because IWS had a boat and my husband was the captain. And one time we got permission to take the boat to Catalina. And it was amazing. We met a bunch of other biologists there and they showed us around and showed us like the eagles because they were working with eagles and it was super amazing. But then on the way back, the seas were very, very, like the swells were huge and it was very intimidating. We probably shouldn't have been going back, but we made it. So another thing about Catalina is that I've learned recently is that, so in addition to there being a lot of biology projects out there, like with, fox and plants and stuff like that. There's also a lot of natural. Currently, my son's current teacher met her husband actually on Santa Catalina Island through a naturalist program. So they were like doing this thing called Naturalists at Large. I think Ventura has like a group, and they take kids and do a bunch of outdoor education on Catalina. So most people think of Avalon when they think of Catalina, but there's a lot going on out there. It's a big island. Okay, and then of course San Nic. That's the other military or another military base. So again, restricted access. I've only been out there once. This is a picture of me on San Nic. I was doing some bird surveys out there, so that's how I got to go. But again, so these make up the Southern Channel Islands. So I just wanted to sort of mention those in that context because I am imagining you've mostly been talking about the Northern Channel Islands because I don't think Maddie spent a lot of time on talking about Clemente. So to end this section, I just want to mention about that particular job, the San Clemente Island job. For me, that was really kind of like getting my foot in the door. And that's how you want to think about it, even if it's not your dream job, which I'm not studying shrikes now, obviously, or I guess not obvious to most of you who don't know me, but it's really just getting the experience. And what happened to most of my friends from that job, right? Because people don't stay in those types of positions forever, right? Even if you have a permanent job, you're usually only out there for a few years. So most of them went to government agencies. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS, so USGS Geological Survey, and then the refuge system. So National Wildlife Refuges. And who knows, they might not have gotten those jobs if they hadn't done the field work, that's not necessarily on San Clemente Island, but had a job like that, right? So all of these are stepping stones. And then many of them went into NGOs. So like the Nature Conservancy continued working for Institute for Wildlife Studies or worked for PRBO, that type of thing. Some of them stuck with working with zoos. So lots of options here. A few of them went into environmental consulting. And environmental consulting is actually a good option, even if it's just temporary for a lot of undergrads, because they're often willing to train you if you don't already have like the skills they're looking for. And then obviously grad school is an option. I went to grad school. There were several other people who went to grad school, and most of them happened to be professors now, but grad school doesn't mean you have to become a professor. So I'm going to just talk really quickly about if you are considering grad school or professional school. Remember, you can skip the internship and real job if you already know you want to go straight into grad school. That's totally an option, but it is helpful to get experience to find out what job you ultimately want and how committed you are, before you kind of dive right in. And so a lot of people ask with respect to grad school, master's or PhD, and you ultimately want to think about what job you want. So what most of the people that I was working with at the time ended up doing PhD programs, and like I said, became professors. But a master's program will definitely get you sort of closer to that dream job in the field, which might not require a PhD. Like for the San Clemente Island job and the USGS Palila project jobs, it was like most people at the supervisory level all had graduate degrees. So either a master's or a PhD, mostly masters. Okay, so those are the types of jobs that, a master's could probably get you. Now, when you're thinking, you also want to be considering like what program, not only the school, but what and location, but the program and especially the advisor. And then for a master's, usually there's a project defined for you. Whereas for a PhD, you're usually coming up with your own project and getting a lot of times your own funding as well. And then a lot of our students actually want to go to vet school, at least with biology majors. But what I'm realizing is that many of our students who want to go to vet school don't realize until they do an internship at a vet clinic that that's really just, mostly cats and dogs. But what they wanted to do, their sort of dream of the reason they want to become a veterinarian is because they love animals. And so, but there's this disconnect between like the wildlife and the vet school. So if you want to work with wildlife and be, say like a vet that works with wildlife, then you really need to choose a program that specializes in that. Okay. And then this is just the last section, so it shouldn't take too long. So I'm, after I finished the job on the island, I ended up coming north, not far north, but to the Northern Channel Islands, basically. I actually went to grad school at UCLA, which I'm going to skip that. But my husband, we decided to live in Ventura, and mainly because he got a job on Santa Cruz Island. So he was working with doing fox surveys, because this was right as the fox were starting to tank. And so he would trap fox, and I would go out there and visit him, and we'd do like set up traps, like really long trap lines to estimate the fox populations. And every time you went to check a fox trap, there wouldn't be a fox and it would be a skunk. That's how low the fox populations were. They've come back up since then, but this was, toward the early 2000s. So it was when the foxes were really declining. And so that's why I have a skunk picture there. It was very stinky. And then we've also done some shrike surveys out on the Northern Channel Islands, because they were trying to determine whether those should be listed. And I think they were petitioned to be state listed. Can't remember I don't know the status currently, but this was just a group from mostly San Clemente Island who all came up to Santa Cruz to do one of the shrike surveys up there. So that was fun. And now, you know, like I said, I'm fast forwarding, skipping grad school and everything. And now I feel like I'm back to the Channel Islands, right? Having gotten the job at CSUCI. And so one of my favorite things is having the opportunity to take students out to the islands. So especially because they're the same age I was, kind of when I was first learning about myself, you know, in that context. And it's so nice to just get away in this remote place and be making friends. And so you guys have seen these types of pictures before. Obviously, the research station. I think this is Dr. Von May holding a frog, because we take various classes. Dr. Von May and I, not currently, but we've been trying to take ecology classes out to the islands. Other select classes, you know, go. These are all Santa Cruz Island. We also, oh, I already showed you that picture. We also take students to, I'm sorry, did I say Santa Rosa? That was Santa Rosa. This is Santa Cruz. So taking students out to Santa Cruz, even just for day trips. That's kind of the advantage of going out to Santa Cruz for classes. And then I know this is going to seem a little bit weird, but I also want to talk about how at CI I've been able to take classes abroad, mainly to Costa Rica, which the reason that I'm bringing this up now is because I just want to kind of remind you of all these opportunities you have at CI, right? Not necessarily now during COVID, but just in general, right? So this is actually sort of an area where there's some mangrove on the Guanacaste Peninsula. But this was some from some of the trips that we've taken down there. This, I feel really appreciative of Dr. Rodriguez from ESRM, who kind of showed me the ropes, kind of took me under his wing and mentored me in a way and showed me the ropes for, like, you know, how to navigate study abroad at CI. Okay, so I'm hoping to do more of this in the future. And then one thing I want to mention is things really come full circle, right? When I went to Costa Rica, I think the last time I met up with my professors that I did that hummingbird project that I started this talk with. So that's them, Alan and Karen. So it's just so interesting how things work like that. And now my main island exposure since COVID has been from a totally different perspective. So we've been going out on boats a lot last fall since, you know, during COVID, because you don't have to be near people, and really experiencing the islands from the water perspective, which I'd never done. So this is really cool. Here's a picture of my husband. Of course, we're bird watching. Lots of good birds. There's me. And we've also had the opportunity to now take our kids and to experience the islands. So that's really neat. Here's a couple of pictures of them looking at field guides. One of my little ones crashing on the way back. So what's interesting is on the Channel Islands, what you'll notice is, you know, when you go out to Santa Rosa, they talk about the area right along the pier is protected. And so the activities are limited there. And it turns out there are a lot of protected areas around the islands. We've been mostly going to Anacapa and Santa Cruz because they're the closest. So it takes us, you know, about an hour to get out there. And so we've been trying to fish. We're learning to fish. Actually, my husband has a lot of experience fishing, but it's been a lot of fun to learn, like, where you can fish, where you can't fish, and see the changes over time. Like when we were going out in August and September, there were like, it was just like pristine. And then I think it was October or November, all of a sudden there's buoys everywhere because that was when the lobster trapping started. So I feel like this is just such a great opportunity to learn about the islands from this completely different perspective. And of course, like everybody, I want to do some island research. I unfortunately haven't really been able to make that happen yet, but I plan to. Just need my kids, I think, to get a little older so I can leave them for extended periods and do some island research, hopefully with birds. There's a lot of really interesting questions about, subspecies and phylogeography questions. But I'm also really interested in plants. My husband's always trying to get me to take on plant projects. So who knows? They're actually a lot easier to work with than birds when it comes to permits and all of that kind of stuff. So, okay. So the last slide, I want to talk about some reoccurring themes and advice that, I'm trying to convey is basically just not to sort of overthink things and worry too much. Some things are just meant to be, I started out my first research project working with hummingbirds. Now, I have opportunities to work with hummingbirds again. So things really do, come full circle. I was on the Channel Islands, then off the Channel Islands. Now I'm back at the Channel Islands. I want to let you know that there's lots of second chances. Like all of the things that I've done, I can't even express to you can't even count how many second chances that I've had to make all of this happen, right? A ton of it does boil down to who you know and networking. So I mentioned this earlier, how your peers now will be your colleagues in the future. And then so much just is about being at the right place at the right time. So again, don't get too down on yourself if something, doesn't work out, you don't get accepted to this program or this or that. And then remember that you are uniquely you. And what I mean by that is you can see with my kind of trajectory, everything that's happened has kind of made me who I am and given me all these experiences. And you're going to have your whole trajectory too to look forward to. So, so with that, that's it. I'm just going to say thank you. These are my two little ones at the beach. And yeah, awesome. I'm going to mute myself for a minute.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Dr. A. That was a great presentation to end on for our guest speaker series this semester. And I love that we had sent emails about what you should talk about in this talk, and I love you hit basically all of the suggestions. I didn't know you were going to go for that, but that was awesome. I was so happy to hear such a wide coverage and sort of that talking about the difference between the southern and northern Channel Islands. Also, if anyone saw me shake my hands during the Costa Rica plug, I went on that trip with Dr. Alvarado 2 years ago, and I'm wearing I wear this necklace every day that I got in the Bree village that we visited, and it's I couldn't talk about the trip enough. So if you have the chance while you're at CI, I say take it. I scrape the money together to take the trip, and I wouldn't take it away that experience for anything. But yeah, if anybody has any questions for Dr. Alvarado, you're free to ask them. Other than that, our meeting's coming to a close here soon. So thank you all for sticking with us, especially those who have been with us for the whole semester. It's been wild, we all know, but we appreciate you all.
I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
Which class offers the Costa Rica trip?
So the way that the school runs their study abroad is that they're sort of their own class. So they're through sort of our international studies office in a way, and they're its own class. It's like a UNIV class. So instead of it being a biology or an ESRM with a number, It's a univ class. And they usually start advertising like the semester before. So say for the spring travel, you'll start hearing announcements and invitations for like an informational session in October. Like our class would go in the spring. And then obviously classes that are going in the fall would need to start advertising in the spring. And usually the classes just go for like 2 to 3 weeks. So it's not like the semester abroad that I did where I was there for the whole semester and took a whole course load. This is one class out of your full load. I think it's usually 3 units. And travel is just a part of it. But the rest of the time, you're getting to know your classmates, which is usually a small class, and you're learning about either the culture or the natural history of the place you're going to travel to.
Cool, thank
Yeah.
you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And in that same scope of those university courses, there's also they were going to do a Cook Island trip finally, I think I heard last year, but it got canceled. But so that's something that could pop up again. There's, I think, a Hawaii one. So there's a few options out there. So if you're interested, keep an eye out, keep an ear out. And
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in with a plug and then a question as well. I may have mentioned these in before, but we're not gonna be able to run them this summer, but in summer 2022, there are going to be multiple opportunities for field classes for CI students at the research station. We will be offering the integrated ESRM anthropology 2 classes, field methods and natural and cultural history of the Channel Islands. And we are also excited to be working with biology with Dr. Alvarado and Dr. Fome and Dr. Dilly to do a special topics in biology course. And our plan is to do that in summer of 2022. And that has private funding that will fund all the food, that will fund all the transportation, that will fund some scholarship opportunities for some students too. And so that is definitely something on the opportunities front. For students, summer of 22. And again, both of these programs have funding, which will cover like all the peripheral costs, everything outside of tuition. And there actually are some scholarships for tuition support as well. So I just plug those as other local opportunities for students to get field experience and spend extended time 2 or even 3 weeks out at the research station. So wanted to plug that. And then I guess my question was, thanks so much for such a great presentation, Allison. It's really neat to see you focus on that arc. And it's really interesting because I think we're a very similar age. So I didn't work on the Palula project or the Fairwinds, but I remember seeing those and applying for them. I'm curious.
Yeah, I remember they had the Orange Jobs website.
Oh, that was the go-to. Yes, for sure. Orange Jobs was the way to go. And on that vein, like you talk about all these, great opportunities and successes you had. And I was wondering if you might speak to the fact of that. How many things did you apply for that you didn't get, or opportunities that you saw like, wow, this is such a great fit for me that didn't work out? Because this is, I think, a common theme for a lot of students.
Yeah, a lot. Like I try to tell students, apply for everything, not meaning like literally apply for everything, right? Because you kind of have to pick and choose, but in your lifetime, you're going to face a lot of rejection, and being able to deal with that and kind of keep
Yes.
moving forward is like will basically guarantee success, because eventually something will work out, but you need so many feelers out there.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, like I brought up, being at the right place at the right time, a lot of the things and second chances and things like that, a lot of the stuff, I think I just got the position because it fell through. Somebody fell through at the last minute, and I happened to, be at the, on top because I had just applied. Or like in graduate school, I applied for so much funding. One of the big ones that I ended up getting, I was a runner-up the previous year. But I spent all this time revising, making the exact changes. And then I got this fellowship like the following year. So it just takes, perseverance.
Agree, absolutely. Have very similar experiences. So I think that's a great point for students. Thank you.
Awesome. I think that's definitely a really good sort of ending piece of advice for our speaker series this semester. It's a good one to drive home. My sisters both got their masters in social work, and to get to the program that got them that, they applied all over the place. So every field, it's super common. Getting through the possible rejections is well worth it. And I guess so. So it's about 6:05 or 6:05. So I can, if it's all right with you, Russ, I guess stop the recording. Okay, and then sort of